Welcome, everybody. This panel is going to be 90 minutes old. It's up till 4 o'clock in 30 minutes. Three participants. First of all, the lady Vesela Cherneva. Should I present her? Sure, definitely. Vesela is Deputy Director of the European Council on Foreign Relations. Topics focus EU foreign policy, Western Balkans and Black Sea region. Former foreign policy advisor of the Bulgarian Prime Minister Kirill Petkov, January-July 2022. Former spokesperson of Bulgarian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and member of political cabinet of the Foreign Minister Mladenov. Very recently, she was quoted by New York Times, "I worry that after so many elections, people will be ready to say, great, we finally have a strong, stable leadership in Bulgaria." But anyway, she is a unbelievably strong and tireless optimist for democracy, and somehow manages to spread her energy among the pro-European community in Bulgaria, even if it's not very big one, for many years. When things go badly, one can hear her say, so we have to redouble our efforts. So welcome to Vesela Cherneva. Then Wojciech Przybilski, Editor-in-Chief of Visegrad Insight, President of the Respublika Foundation. He's Europe Future Fellow at the Institute of Human Sciences in Vienna and Erste Foundation. Co-authored the book Understanding Central Europe, 2017 published. He's publishing in foreign policy, Politico, Gospodarskie Noviny, Die Zeit, Gazeta Wyborcza, guest of BBC, Al Jazeera Europe, Euronews, TRT World, etc. He's going to present a strategic foresight report, How Democracy Can Win and Europe Lose. When I read it, I'm sorry to say it, but look, the four scenarios, there is a talking about the alliance of convenience, talk about the Renaissance, fractured horizons, shadows of the Union, which reminds me quite a lot of Game of Thrones, new season, or at least House of Dragons. So welcome, and very interesting to hear your report and your presentation. And the last, Dr. Garvan Walsh, welcome. Co-founder of Unhacked Democracy. He works on security and defense policy, develops technology to counter propaganda, improve the quality of debate in the public sphere with his tech startup, Article 7 Intelligence. Irish national, former foreign policy advisor to the British Conservative Party, rather former, because a lot of time passed since then. PhD from the University of Manchester, published in foreign policy, Conservative Home. He's a research associate of Wilfried Martens Center for European Studies, head of communications at the European Policy Center, etc. Just to give you a slogan of the Unhacked Democracy: activating public-spirited citizens, politicians, and businesses, and to warn you that rewire your mind, rewire your country. Hope-based mindset shift incubator for civil society activists in Hungary, Poland, and Bulgaria. So welcome to the mind shifters from Ireland. So let's start with the lady. I'm in the business. I'm journalist, Deputy-in-Chief of Dnevnik BG in Bulgaria for more than 2 decades. Very recently, especially the last 10 days, I was thinking that my attention towards the international news is turning into just writing about the Black Swan events. Thinking about Slovakia, thinking about Iran yesterday. So now we are going to talk happily about the white swans of Europe. It's much more predictable, I hope. So please, the floor is yours, the conversation about the swans of Europe.
Thank you very much. This is supposed to be the predictable part. We're going to talk about data. And data in social sciences, of course, has limited, what should I say, explanation power, but it's still the best tool that we have to try and predict what is going to happen. As we know, there is a new big redistribution maybe of influence in the European institutions, especially in the European Parliament. And there is a question about whether the Parliament is going to shift to the right, to the far right rather, and whether there would be a new point of balance, a new kingmaker in the European terrain, whether this will be this time the European People's Party. We have tried to check various assumptions with regard to the European Parliament, but also with regard to the expectations of European citizens from the institutions. I will draw your attention to two publications. One was done by Simon Hicks early in the year, a forecast that I will mention, but also a public opinion poll that we did in January in 12 countries of the European Union, with basically who cover 75% of the European population. We tried to find out what is that really drives people's attention and people's fears, because obviously this campaign is based a lot on fears and anxieties of people. And as you can see, there are at least five, but we added also the sixth, the war in Gaza. So 5+1 crises that are driving people's motivations and expectations in this election, and this is by far not migration. It is actually different in different groups of countries. For some countries, mostly for the countries in the south, like Greece, like Italy, like Portugal, it's the economic crisis. And here, I think it is both about the kind of the follow-on from the 2008 economic crisis, but also the very recent inflation that has hit Europe via the war. For the countries in the front line or close to the front line, like Poland, but also the Baltic states, it's the war. Interestingly enough, COVID still is a very important driver, a very important memory in a number of countries. Most notably, this is Spain, but also in Romania and also Greece. And for people, but especially for the young people across Europe, and for a plurality of respondents in France and the Netherlands, it's still the climate change. Migration is actually very much less a concern that the far right is trying to portray it or is trying to convince us. Only in countries which are maybe more of a destination of migration, like the Netherlands, Germany, and Austria, migration is a real issue. In all of the rest of Europe, this is actually not very much an issue. And even if it is, you see, and this is probably the picture in Bulgaria, that most people worry about emigration, about people leaving their compatriots leaving their countries, rather than about immigration. And we can discuss that, but I think it is also the case that a lot of those societies who have experienced who have, the perception of the economic crisis or of the war being more prominent, for them, migration is clearly falling behind as a motivation. We have tried to see also what is the far right after. So if they are about fears, and if migration is kind of over emphasized. What is that they really are after? And it's very interesting that most of the voters understand that the far right has shifted, that it's not anymore about destroying the EU, destroying the European project. It's not about their country leaving the EU. It is actually much more about changing it from within, even if it would lead to breaking it up. I'm not going to go into details of this, and I'm happy to answer later on, but I think this one is particularly interesting. Giorgia Meloni's Italy, for instance, clearly moved to the European mainstream rather than to the far right, especially compared to Hungary of Orban, or to Poland, meaning peace. And this is a very good illustration of this idea that most of those anti-European parties are actually about breaking up the EU from within. This is especially valid for Kaczynski and Orban. Here, coming to the basics, what is that is going to change, and I'm sure colleagues will talk about it as well. This forecast is probably going to change 1 or 2 seats here and there, but the fact is that we see a decline of the center and a rise of the far right and a little bit of the far left as well. So this is why I was saying at the beginning that, as you can see, even though EPP is going to lose some votes, it will be the one to decide whether there will be a coalition on the right with the far right, or there will still be kind of a coalition in the center. And here you can see that this balance between the two is very fragile numerically. So basically there is no clear answer to what would be kind of the more stable majority, if we can talk about that. If you allow me, just using one very last minute, because you started about the white swans and the black swans, and probably I will contradict also myself a little bit by saying that, but I think this election is actually much less going to be about the left and the right. This election is going to be about whom we think is going to get us out of this mess. People clearly perceive many crises at the same time, and especially in countries with weak institutions, and we see this in Slovakia, but I believe we see this also in Bulgaria. There very easily can be kind of this tendency to think that there is not a set of institutions that can cope with a crisis, but that can be one person. And having this tendency connected or very much coupled with the kind of the accessibility of private interests, corruption, which immediately comes when there is a vacuum left by the institutions. I think this combination of kind of the authoritarian drive with the corruption fundament, if I can put it this way, could become the formula for a big group of countries as we go to the elections on the 9th of June.
Thank you, Ms. Cherneva. This is the longer part of the thing I quoted from New York Times, your fears. So the next participant, Wojciech, you already have this report on your seats. I joked really about that it looks like a Game of Thrones, but look, the fourth and the least possible scenario starts like this. In the hollowed halls of the European Parliament, the alternative for Germany emerged as a dark horse their victory sent shockwaves through the continent. It sounds like a Game of Thrones, but anyway, seriously, what are these scenarios, and is there talking about a redefinition of the right, what the far right means this time? Because Vesela mentioned it. We are afraid that there are many people afraid that far right is growing in the popularity and probably in presentation, but should we talk about redefining what far right means? Wojciech.
Well, I'll try to address this question as well, and thank you for having me. Thank you, NIS, the CIVICS, ECFR, for partnering up in this important discussion. First, maybe I'll say what Visegrad Insight is, because it's a media platform, and it's, for a couple of years, started to serve as a think tank or analytical platform that builds on this media presence across the region. And our ambition is to not really to connect and make a coherent story from Central Europe, but in this very divided and geographically and politically divided region, to make a story for Europe from within, give voices in a structured debate on the future of Europe. And this is why we are engaged in strategic foresight. These exercises that produce similar reports are no less important, are no less focused on the reports themselves as on the debates that we're now having. And this is why it is really important to understand that debates like this, the voices from our capitals and our societies, are actively and more shaping the future of Europe. So here is what we're trying to do: structure our debate. That's merely that, and you know, the dragons don't show up necessarily there, speaking of the House of Cards, but we're not shying away from some of the scenarios that are going to the far end of possibilities, only to map these possibilities as even extreme, because the reality is somewhere always happening between those borders in this framework. And why we do it, I think it's really important to remember that for about 7 or 8 years, Europe has woken up to Brexit and to and probably strategic foresight hasn't been done with societies and in public in a sense of communication ahead of Brexit, because the Brexit hangover meant that after taking a decision, taking a policy vote, there was a day after during which everybody started asking question, okay, what are the consequences? So in a sense, we need that kind of debate to treat ourselves seriously in Bulgaria, as across Central Europe, even more, to ask ourselves consequences of the decisions that are upcoming. So that's my initial remark. I'll have 5 points, and I'll try to address this question, which is impossible to answer strictly. So first, is it going to be a make or break of the EU, or are these the most important elections of our lifetime? To the first, I don't know. To the second, yes, these are the most important elections of our lifetime. So far, in 5 years, there will be another most important elections for the EU, because every elections are the most important when they happen. But here, these elections, I think what Vesela was already demonstrating in ECFR projections, are going to bring about a number of fragmentation in the European Parliament. Whether it's going to be the right-wing tilt, if you can describe it, or more, it's about center losing the middle ground and the influence on the whole. We will see eventually, but definitely management of the EU might look more difficult for the next 5 years. And these are troubled times. And of course, we're not escaping the context in which this particular vote is taking place. This context requires actual decision-making, more and more, difficult decisions, difficult debates. So the question is whether this polarized, more, we wouldn't call it necessarily polarized, but more diverse representation in the European Parliament, and therefore more difficult decision-making is going to be a good thing. Some would say yes, it's democracy. plurality is the key. But on the other hand, we know that there are many people who fundamentally disagree with certain decisions that are going to take place. And in the upcoming vote, we will also decide the so-called EU strategic agenda. EU strategic agenda is essentially the policy direction prepared by the policy leaders of the Union, which are prime minister, chancellors, one chancellor, and presidents in the council. But the parliament approves, and the parliament also confirms the commission. So it's really important to remember that while European Parliament, it doesn't necessarily have a lot of power, nominally speaking, it actually has in practice influenced the European decision-making and has been so far a constructive actor, even an actor that has been pushing for more agency of the Union. So in these times, if we need more agency, we actually put forward a recommendation. One of the key recommendation that is so important to say in this forum is the civic education. We will need to have a parliament with a function that will explain and will embed democratic support for whatever decision and deliberation there will be, because these decisions which are upcoming are going to be sometimes very controversial or if not decisive sometimes for the EU, but they need to bring on board the European public. And European Parliament has this function. It has to also think and embody somehow the element of cohesiveness, and the cohesion in such a diverse, multipolar parliament will be of essence. Now, having that said in the beginning, we should remember that's my second point, that voting for the European Parliament and overall in these elections, as we constructed these scenarios, is going to be on one side about bringing about European power or European sovereignty, some people say, or the capabilities of the EU to a higher level, a higher gear, or lowering the potential. On the other hand, this is going to be very much about the democratic health, the performance in the EU institutions, and they are not perfect, we know, but also protecting democratic systems of which European Union is constructed. So, so the focus, I think, should be, and that's also a conclusion of our report, very much on ourselves in order to reinforce our institutions and reinforce democratic processes in order to deliver on the promise of European power. I think that it was too much to say 5 years ago that we want a geopolitical Europe. We're hardly geopolitical as European Union. But definitely one element that distincts European project from everything else in the world, that it's a sphere of democratic security so far. And that makes, I think, us so attractive. We should build on that. Three more quick points. European Parliament has served in the past as the voice of democratic consciousness, while the other institutions were doing different games. European Commission tried to be the geopolitical commission, that was the branding. But more times than not, it saw the limits of its ambitions. But the European Parliament has quite effectively a few times managed to influence democratic security agenda by pushing Article 7, by making emphasis on the rule of law conditionality, by also initiating a number of processes that led in the parliamentary debate on the questions of either human rights, civil liberties, or the big questions when it comes to Hong Kong or Taiwan. So I think it's important to remember that the European Parliament is also has this function and will have this focus. I would love to speak about the EU strategic agenda and what it means also with the Polish input into it, but maybe we can leave it for a discussion. I have a few points on that, but definitely what we're going to see is that there is a lot of security talk now among the leaders. I think there is a big impact of the voice from Warsaw. Donald Tusk's essential government message of Donald Tusk is security first and foremost. But then what kind of security is the question? And the EU agenda has changed since we've seen in the Granada Declaration from economic security alone or primarily to now 3 pillars in the early drafts that we see of the next upcoming agenda. Security proper, including defense, enlargement, and migration and borders. Security, economic security, point number 2 or pillar number 2, but also freedoms and democracy. This focus is now back, and this is something we have been advocating. And finally, my final point on the agency and the right wing, the role of the right wing. I tend to think, and I don't know yet really what is the answer to the role or redefinition of the far right or extreme right. I'm using rather Kasmude. I like Kasmude, simple and clear definitions of one being anti-democratic, anti-institutional, and the other simply pushing it to the boundaries, but still within the framework. I don't know what their role will be, but I think we should always ask the question how much they contribute to European agency, how much they are about European Union having agency in this world, within or externally, or how much they contribute to the limitation of the agency of our own institutions, and even especially when they're being elected to European Parliament.
Thank you, Wojciech. This just remind me that last week I was in a meeting with a old guard European. I wouldn't mention the name, but he told me when I asked him about Giorgia Meloni, what he thinks about her and her position as a ECR influential person. He said, look, she was noticed and introduced to me years ago by Mario Monti and Mario Draghi. Then suddenly all the talking about the far right in Italy, Giorgia Meloni specifically, not the other 2 parties, is becoming a little bit different and interesting. Now let's turn to Garvan Walsh. All is talking about the Europe as strategic player and security. Excuse me, but it reminds me of a knife without a blade. So the blade concerning the security, always you're thinking about NATO, about the country across the Atlantic Ocean, and you are here just to talk about the political strategies of the pro-European parties that can be adopted as a fight to expect radical right shift in Europe, and the security is one of the main points that is used by the far right. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Luisa, for convening this fantastic debate here. I like this talk about agency, and I like this talk about what does it mean to have this kind of strategy without a blade. Frederick the Great used to say that diplomacy without an army is like music without instruments. And the EU likes to have lots of instruments, but whether the right kind of instruments designed for the task at hand is a much deeper question. And I've got about 4 things to say here. I don't think I'll quite manage 5, I'm afraid. But the first one is that it's no longer 2016. The second one, and this echoes very much what has been said by both Vesela and Wojciech, that there are actually 2 types of right wing in Europe now. Let's talk about both of them. The third one is I'm going to talk about the vulnerabilities of Melonismo. So we may see that Meloni indeed is going to be a thread running through this whole discussion. And then I'm going to talk about the centre-right and what it means to be centre-right in Europe these days, and the dilemmas that being centre-right has for your political strategy. So when I was last involved in the Conservative Party was during the Brexit campaign. I was one of the Remainers, don't worry. And at that time, we faced a pretty united anti-European nationalistic kind of movement. They talked about immigration. They said the EU was all completely wrong. They wanted to go back to the world of competing nation states that they believed had served Europe so well. Let's park that for a second. But this was their This was their agenda. Instead of being really close and being trapped in this straitjacket of excessive centralization, let's go back to being friends. Instead of being trapped in this terrible kind of divorce, let's be, friends a little bit more remote from each other, but that way we'll be able to get on better and cooperate better. This was the hopeful message of the Brexit campaign. But since then, two very important things have happened. One is that Brexit failed. It didn't achieve any of these things. We, of course, warned them that it wouldn't achieve any of these things, but the public didn't listen to us in large enough numbers. But they've nevertheless tried it. The UK hasn't got the kind of economic boost they said Brexit would give them. It hasn't got the greater global influence they said it would give them. And it hasn't got the renewed sense of national purpose they said Brexit would give them. In fact, Britain's suffering from particular economic decline, particularly in the manufacturing sector, where Brexit was very popular. It's suffering from a decline in global influence because people outside Europe particularly say, well, what the hell were you doing? And people inside Europe are still pretty annoyed about what they did. And finally, it's not leading to a new sense of national purpose in the UK. It's instead led to a lot of division in the UK as people argued over what Brexit was about. So a lot of right-wingers have said, hold on a minute, if we're going to be right-wing, maybe we shouldn't do this. Maybe there's something else we should do. And one of the people who has really been leading that charge has been Giorgia Meloni. The second split that's happened among the nationalist right in Europe has been the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. Because many of these so-called European nationalists, whether it's Rassemblement National in France, who might be better called Russie Nationale, whether it's the Konfederacja in Poland, otherwise known as konfederacja.ru for their website rather than .pl, or indeed various other, Matteo Salvini, whose henchmen were caught trying to actually raise money in Russia, the AfD. Investigations have been opened into them for Russian spying. And before 2022, it was just about possible, unfortunately, but it was just about possible, particularly in Western Europe, to say, no, we just want better relationships with Russia. And that had a certain plausibility. Maybe Russia was misunderstood. Maybe there were things that we had got wrong. After that, that argument has become much more difficult. It doesn't land among the public. Even in places like Greece, which is the most pro-Russian country outside Russia in the EU, the Russians have been unable to gain support for their strategic agenda. And this is partly because of a number of mistakes they've made. But it just doesn't fly. And in countries like Portugal, where you don't really associate them with hotbeds of pro-Ukrainian feeling, 80 or 90% of the people support Ukraine. They think more should be done. It's something. The invasion has really touched something very deep in the European psyche. Something feeling like, hold on a minute, this stuff was not supposed to happen after 1945. Why is it happening again? And that's caused the alliance of nationalists, which between them could get on average of about 20% of the vote across Europe. It's caused this to split into two factions. One faction, the AfD, Matteo Salvini, is still pursuing the old pro-Russian line, but other than in France and the Netherlands, where there are particular reasons for the support that individual leaders have, they haven't really been able to maintain that support. Instead, we have a new kind of right-wing agenda that Meloni is leading. And this is four elements that are, we may say, are coherently conservative. It's strong on defense. It's anti-Kremlin. It wants a fortress Europe on immigration. Let's, make sure we have really tough migration policies. Let's not let asylum seekers in. Let's do deals with Albania so that some processing can happen over there. It's hostile to a lot of the green measures that have been developed recently by the European Parliament in the last few years, and it's economically protectionist, but crucially it is not anti-European in the broader sense. They don't want to go back to a bunch of member states cooperating loosely. They want to make Europe as a whole a more right-wing place. So if you're not a right-wing, but you're a pro-European, this has to change then what you do and how you respond to it. It's no good saying these people are just anti-European because Meloni is not anti-European. And she wants a different kind of Europe, a more right-wing Europe, a more Marshall Europe, a Europe that's more hostile to immigration, but she still wants it to be Europe. She doesn't want it to be a group of member states anymore. Marine Le Pen still wants the other type, but it's a very different kind of phenomenon. And so if you're a pro-European on the center or the left or even the center-right, you have to think about that. So where is this new agenda, which is more coherent than the other one? The original, even on immigration, where all the nationalists agreed on in principle, they could never agree on a policy because Salvini wanted to distribute the asylum seekers around Europe, and the last thing Orban wanted to do was to get more of them into Hungary. So they couldn't reach agreement over practical migration policy. But this one is more coherent. So where is it vulnerable? And there are a number of issues. The biggest one, as we saw in Poland, is abortion. Trying to graft social conservatism onto this coalition isn't going to work because there aren't enough social conservatives in Europe broadly for it to happen. There are countries that might be where you might have a socially conservative right-wing vote, like indeed Poland, like in Bulgaria. There's others where it's quite different, like the Netherlands. It's very hard for this kind of alliance to stay together if the EU starts taking positions on issues like abortion, because it starts to divide the alliance. So one of the big lessons of just political tactics: pick things that unite your friends and divide your enemies. Don't pick issues that divide your friends and unite your enemies. On the environment, we can't quite be as directly into dividing lines as we can on things like women's rights, but we can. People are suspicious of a lot of the measures taken to deal with climate change. They don't want to have to be forced to organize a builder to put a heat pump into their house. But people are generally sympathetic to dealing with the environment. They want a nice environment. They want to deal with climate change. It's possible to think up of new kinds of policies that are a bit less into what you might want to call climate austerity, and are a bit more into adapting to people's lives and making a green life good. We keep talking about how high-speed trains are brilliant and a great way to get around Europe. So let's build some high-speed train lines instead of just making flying more expensive. There are questions about economics, and Meloni is particularly vulnerable on economic policy. She has no sensible economic policy. They want to ban artificial meat. They are very suspicious of artificial intelligence. They want to really fail to have any change in economic policy. But this is something where other forces, particularly the more liberal ones, have something to say, and they should be saying it. They should be having a positive, progressive sense of how they see technological progress happening, how they see us dealing with climate change with exciting new green technologies, how they see us building the unicorns in the tech businesses of the future instead of trying to block it all. And finally, the question of migration is probably the most difficult for the center and center-left, even more difficult for the center-right. But we're starting to see problems with a Fortress Europe policy. We have a labor shortage across Europe. Even countries like Romania have a labor shortage. Never mind the Netherlands, which has both a labor shortage and a housing shortage. It's a really difficult problem to solve. But you can start facing up to this problem as a difficult problem and saying, well, those guys just want to, build up a bunch of walls, but those walls are actually really expensive. It's costing us a lot of money to do deals with warlords in Libya to try and prevent people coming over to Italy and Greece to claim asylum. It's costing us, it's preventing us taking advantage of labor supply. I mean, lots of Syrians have come to Germany, but they've found it incredibly difficult to navigate a hugely bureaucratic German system of qualifications that they have. These people could be doing much better. They could be having far more interesting jobs, contributing to a German economy that's currently flatlining. But the old ways of doing things are preventing them from getting ahead. We can bring that debate actually into the public and say, look, this is a serious and difficult issue. It's not a simple question of, are we humanitarians who want to give people asylum, or are we horrible people who just want to drown people fleeing war and persecution? The real issues are much more complicated and much more difficult, but we can have that conversation with the public. And to bring me on to the last area of the center right, the Greek Prime Minister Mitsotakis is starting to openly have that conversation. He's deliberately moving to the center. He'd been quite relatively hard right leader of New Democracy, concentrating on economic reforms, but with pretty tough migration policy. And he's now saying, hold on a minute, well, that actually hasn't even worked for me. We still have a lot of problems in Greece. We have to, now that our economy is doing well, we've got labor demand. How do we fill that labor demand? And actually we in Europe are next to a region where there's lots of labor supply. Let's start thinking about how this can work more practically. So this it comes into the center-right tactics as well as the tactics of the center or the left. As long as there was a big united nationalist right-wing camp that could get 20%, you could imagine a center-right plus a right-wing uniting the right, as they said, making up 45, 50% of the vote and being able to govern. That doesn't work very well when you actually govern that way. There are lots of reasons why it's not very effective policy, as we found out in the UK. But it can assemble a majority. But now the war has made this impossible because the nationalist right is fundamentally divided on attitudes to Russia. And Russia policy is incredibly salient. You can't get away with being a European country and not having a policy on the war. This war. You can get away with not having a policy on Gaza, but you can't get away with not having a policy on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So this means you have to pick. And if you have the center-right plus, the Meloni type, the ECR, if you want to call it that, with a big asterisk about law and justice, it's not clear that law and justice really fit into this new arrangement. If you have that, you get up to about 33, 35%. That's not enough to actually rule. So you need allies from the center and center left if you're going to win a majority there. So this is real. These dilemmas pose big questions about this sort of nightmare scenario. Is there going to be a far right takeover? No, there isn't. The numbers aren't there. In fact, there are ways to have either center left with a bit of center right European majority, or a majority that does tactical deals with someone like Meloni. Both these things are possible. So let's see then what will happen after the elections. But it's not going to be the nightmare scenario. It's going to be an evolution.
Now we're entering the Q&A session. Just to close these presentations with a very simple question. Are we talking about the 27 national elections framed by so-called European Parliament elections? Because you talked about the different approaches. You mentioned 4 scenarios. Ms. Cherner presented the national results. Or we are talking about the real European elections across the continent. It concerns the turnout. It concerns what the politicians are selling to the audience. As a journalist, I would completely skip the conversation about how do you reach the audience and the voters. 27 national elections or?
It's always 27 national elections. And in a country where we were going to have the national election on the same day, even more. But look, there are still some underlying themes that are common and some underlying trends that we hopefully, all of us, kind of demonstrated. To me, there will be maybe 3 big topics on which there will be a common answer during this election. One is how to calibrate the green agenda. Basically, is it going to be about curbing it? Is it going to be about reframing it? But there needs to be some sort of a course correction there that became visible. Secondly, how to react to the war. Maybe that's even the first one, but basically this is going to be decisive also in terms of enlargement, in terms of the next European budget, the next financial framework. And the third issue is going to be basically about so to say, the heart and soul of the EU. So what do we do with our democracies? That means, do we continue talking about migration from this kind of very defensive point of view, or do we turn it into an opportunity, maybe working on our labor shortages? Do we take care about our democracies in terms of doing more on corruption, doing more on media, doing more on polarization? And to me, this is also going to be about Orban and, sorry, about Trump. I mean, how is Europe going to position itself in a world in which it will have to act alone much more than before?
Yes, 27 races, but the interesting points are what are the common discussions. And Garvan mentioned Meloni, which almost read like Donald Tusk in his speech from Katowice when they met with Ursula von der Leyen, and he presented 5 points plan of his version plan for Europe. Point number one, defense. Well, he says 100 billion euro easy on defense. Then we talk serious commitment. He's got national agenda in that, because we have national commitments for our own army and security and defense that requires European funding. So that's essentially he's between rock and a hard place also. But that's a European question of today, and very much connecting to the security, the hard security. Second point, he means migration and borders, and he means more borders than migration. That way he relates to what Macron said a few weeks earlier at Sorbonne, where Macron spoke at length, I don't know if you notice, about borders of Europe, that sovereignty requires that there are borders of Europe. And now we can argue where those borders are and should be, also because of the enlargement process. But the very fact of emphasis on borders is something that is part of a European discussion of today. Less so on migration. Migration is in Poland, it's not about migration. Poland, until the war broke out, was already for 5 consecutive years the main destination, or at least passage. But in terms of registered third country nationals who would take their residence in the EU, Poland was number 1 for 5 consecutive years until 2021. And then war happened and numbers went only up. I'm not currently sure what the number 1 is, but still, definitely, it's not a migration problem. I think it's because of the work, but it's about, and it's a very specific Polish, Finnish, and Baltic understanding of the challenge, which is not smuggling groups in Libya, but the state apparatus of KGB in Belarus and FSB and GRU in Russia orchestrating hybrid attack on the European border. And this is point number 2, very much aligned with what Meloni said. The point number 3 was economy, sort of between European protectionism. Our economy or our business actors shouldn't be treated worse than those away. So that resonates. And maybe this is in preparation to the scenario number 1 that is being explained exactly, that these elements connect and unite. Climate, it's a difficult thing, and I think all across the board we see EPP or Christian Democrats across Europe thinking whether car drivers are important electoral group for them, and they realize they are. Car producers, no less. And the fourth one, the fifth one, the last one, was actually Tusk was speaking something that resonated what you described in Meloni's term, with the love for Europe as a project. So he was committed in his last point number 5, to the emphasis on and Europe in its European integration, historical phenomena, kind of anchoring it down in the memory. And interestingly, yes, there was nothing of, you would say, agenda that brought this amazing turnout in the last parliamentary general election, which was the agenda on abortion. It was agenda on individual freedoms and and choices and a female agenda. None of that was present. So I think in terms of the upcoming EP elections, that will have an impact on the turnout, which might be simply lower.
Garvan, and please keep it short, please.
As we all know, there are 27 national elections. Political scientists call these second-order elections because people often use them to give their government a kicking. But there are elections with increasing European effects, even if people don't vote for that reason. So it matters who's in the European Parliament because they get to choose who the next Commission president is. They have a veto over it, so in fact they have control. And Ursula von der Leyen, I think, made a mistake in choosing not to campaign for it. She had the chance to run as a local candidate in Lower Saxony. She didn't do it. Had she done so, she's one of the few figures with Europe-wide name recognition. She could have probably had what the Americans called coattails for presidential candidates, when you win your party extra seats. So she might have had, I'm picking numbers out of the air, but she might have given the EPP 10 or 15 extra seats across the whole of Europe. And that could make the difference, actually, between her being Commission President and her not being Commission President. Last time, her majority in the Parliament was about 10. So how does she get that over the line? This time is a very important question, because the Social Democrats didn't like her last time because they felt that their guy, Frans Timmermans, had it taken away at the last minute. The Liberals and Social Democrats are suspicious that the EPP is moving too far to the right for them. So if they try and do too many deals with Maloney and the ECR, they might end up with losing votes on the left and still not getting it through. So it's not clear that Ursula von der Leyen will actually make it over the line. Then the question is, who else would it be? I'll leave that one open. But these elections matter for that, even though voters in most of Europe won't be voting for the presidency of Europe at all.
Yes. Thank you, Garvan. Now I'm turning to our guests, hoping that you got part of the answers for your questions. Please present yourself shortly, and let's keep it no more than 2 questions, please. One is perfect.
It's unfortunate, but I have 2, but I'll merge them into 1. But I'll just make a very quick remark. So I always wonder what is the middle ground between polarization and fragmentation. You mentioned the UK, we saw what polarization leads to. In Bulgaria, we have instability largely because of fragmentation. But my key takeaway is that the middle ground is evolution, and I really like this positive note. And because it says here that we're caught between reality and hope, one of my question is, you mentioned, Vesela, that this election is about left and right, but to what extent do we hope that the big camps on the left and the right in the European Parliament will actually manage to stay close to the center? Because looking at the EPP campaign, they very largely co-opt and accommodate some radical right or far right issues and discourse of speech and politics. And I find this personally very worrying. And then the other one, if you give me a second, is, yes, and this actually relates to a sub-question. So you also mentioned coalition majority and whether we can hope for a stable one, but we know in Bulgaria, it's a very contentious issue to have situational majorities. So what about if these majorities are floating between policies? Because as we saw, Meloni is okay on Ukraine, but not okay on migration and so on. So what is the expectation to have some sort of a floating situation? Thank you. I would say it's whoever feels like addressing it. I think it fits in the context in general. Thank you.
Sure. I think that the whole issue about majorities in the case of European Parliament is a bit a connoisseur thing, right? Because we have a majority that puts together, that votes in the Commission, and then it votes on certain legislation, but actually this is not a government and this is not a parliament in the national sense of the word. Meaning the member states will be still the ones to have the biggest say. And from that perspective, having shifting majorities, I don't think is that big of a deal. It has happened in the past quite a lot, and it will depend a lot on the issues. And so I think, for instance, the Russia dividing line may be a dividing line in one case, but not so much a dividing line on other issues. And I really don't think, I mean, I hope Garvan is right, but I still think that the possibility of having kind of center-right, far-right, extreme-right, let's be correct, this type of majority on certain issues is not at all impossible. And we saw only 2 days ago Orban and Marine Le Pen and addressing Vox in Spain. I mean, those things that we know that they're not easy to unite, but they know it as well. And so they're working on it. And I know that there is a special institute in Hungary who has been doing a lot of polling, a little bit like the one we have been doing, checking what are the areas on which they overlap, kind of the brother parties across Europe. I'm sure they also have a good list. But to me, what is really worrying is much more the national kind of the national dimension of all of this, because we're going to see a surge of the right, of the far right in the European Parliament, but we're going to see this also in various national elections. We have this already in some member states. We saw now the Dutch government just a couple of days ago. We have several elections coming up this year and next year as well. We have a big French election at some point further down the line. And I don't want to be, you know, professing, because Peter also mentioned that I always try to be optimistic. I don't want to kind of betray my my public appearance here, my brand. But it is, I think this is what is worrying, that in the end we will have many more governments who have this kind of Eurosceptic attitude, and they will be sitting around the council table. We will have to be much smarter, much more intelligent, and we will have to be much more adaptable in our societies, but also our politicians around the council table.
We have breaking news from the Die-Hard Optimist. Gentlemen, if you want to answer the question.
I spoke at length, so I can only say that I think ECR, the European Conservative Reformist Group, declined Orban the possibility of a membership eventually. So that's a week from last week, if I'm not mistaken, in this sense. And it's very hard for him to build anything. It simply takes time and a lot of effort that is unlikely to succeed in terms of making a grouping, a political grouping. I know they're trying.
If Trump comes, there will be much more weight, I think. I don't want to over-talk Orban's value and weight, but I think there will be a change in the general mood.
If I may say so, here on this point of House of Game of Thrones, not House of Cards, but anyway, they both connect. They both connect, and it's a binge watch. We're all addicted to. Unlike Lancaster, Trump never pays his debts.
Okay.
Let's hope that on the 6th of November we will already have a new commission, because then it's rather complicated in Brussels and Strasbourg.
I mean, to take two things. One is the good news is whatever the EPP campaign says centrally, no one is listening to it. Nobody in any European country is paying the slightest bit of notice to what they have been cooked up. They've been cooking up in EPP headquarters, because there are 27 national elections. They are listening to what the CDU are saying, or what the Partido Popular are saying, or what Donald Tusk is saying. But what the EPP headquarters says isn't noticed by anybody. in Europe, for better or worse. What is more interesting and more worrying, of course, is this point about fragmentation. And I think fragmentation is just going to be something we're going to have to get used to in our politics. The era of big center-right and center-left politics, which is in any case a kind of projection back on a much more unstable post-war democratic world than actually exists. This is the kind of, we think, oh yeah, the 40s to 80s, they were center-left, center-right, alternating in power, but we had Algeria in French, we had the collapse of the Fourth Republic, de Gaulle, we had the civil rights crisis in the United States, the assassination of Martin Luther King, the Weathermen. In Britain, you had major strikes in the late 1970s, the 3-day working week because they couldn't generate enough power to actually keep industry going on. Even in these, very large, famously stable countries, we actually had a lot of political instability. That's normal, and we shouldn't project back an idea of perfect decisiveness because it happens to fit into a political science model here. It was much messier in the past, and it's going to be messy in the future, and we need to just learn to manage that mess because it's normal. Yes, we're in very difficult situations right now, particularly because of the war, particularly because we've had things like the pandemic, because we lack a positive economic agenda. One of the big things I would encourage the centrist parties to do is start talking about enterprise and empowerment and give people some economic hope again that their lives are going to get better. This is where the green messaging has been catastrophic, because it's been saying, and I blame Ed Miliband for this. I actually blame Ed Miliband for everything, but we could talk about that later, because he said, look, we've got a carbon budget, we've got this is the amount that we can emit, and our job is to continually emit less. Bring this down. Essentially, he's like some kind of slightly different version of an order liberal German saying we can't ever borrow any money. And as a result, it's been, people think, oh, well, we've got to save money, we've got to do less, we've got to do stuff. And people are saying, well, hold on a minute, we've just had 20% inflation. Life is really tough. We can't tolerate this. The way we're going to get out of this is by learning how to build our economies in a new way that just pollutes less, not by having less economy. And until we make that shift in environmental policy and make that shift in economic policy, the centrist parties who depend on making these practical kind of economic arguments aren't going to be able to take the initiative back. And they need to take the initiative back, and the road to centrist initiative goes right through the economy.
Yeah, thank you, Gavin. It starts to look a little bit like keep calm and ... The audience, next question.
Ivan Lutzkanov here. So you talked in great detail about this right shift in European politics. And, well, it is actually a shift in voter preferences, if we phrase it that way. So my question is, how long do you think this shift is going to last? Are we talking about a new short-term trend where we complain about the right shift for 5 years and then we have another 5 years complaining about the Greens and then 5 years of something different? Or are we observing a long-term change in the way Europeans look at things? Would you try to make some prediction about it? Obviously, we can't know the future, but analyzing the reasons behind it, you might have a clue.
Yeah, thank you. I'll take one more. One more question. Yes, please. Could you please repeat it? You're interested more in the turnout, the voter turnout. Okay. 2 is enough. I don't know. Probably it was a question. The first one was about the purpose of everything else.
I'll have a go at the first one. I think the big thing that's going on, if we were to take a really long-term view, is that we're in the middle of a period of two-way globalization. In Europe, we were really good at globalizing for about 500 years. We sent our people, our money, our armies. We globalized everywhere. We did an awful lot of immigration. And we, ended up controlling most of the world as a result. Then other parts of the world adapted. And guess what? We don't like these ideas coming back. We don't like Chinese money, Islamic political ideas, people from everywhere else. This causes a lot of discomfort. And the nationalist answer to this discomfort is to say, let's put up a bunch of walls. So the conclusion of that view is that this is going to be with us for some time. There are always going to be people who will be able to say, the world's a complicated, dangerous place. We're no longer, and you see this particularly in big countries, because small countries were never particularly sovereign anyway. But when they were massive empires, Britain and France could do what they liked in the world. And if you were a British or French voter, you got a guarantee of what you wanted. Now that's not true anymore. They're medium-sized countries. They're buffeted around the place. So if you're going to be this kind of medium-sized country or a small country, it's very easy to come along and say, Marine Le Pen saying, don't worry, I'm going to restore the world that used to exist. You as a French person will get what you want. No one will be able to interfere with you. And that's a powerful piece of rhetoric. So we're going to have this for some time.
You mentioned for some time, you mean a generation? Let's not talk about the years, but generation probably?
I guess, particularly until the France is an exception, and like in most of the hard right tends to gain its support from people in their sort of 50s to 70s. France, it's different. Their peak hard right support is between people like 35 to 55. So outside France, it's probably a generation. France, it's probably 2 generations where this will still go on.
Okay. Anyone on the first question or on the second?
Maybe I can take the second one, but couple it with what Garvin just said.
Yep, please.
On the turnout, last time around, if you remember, the turnout for the first time went up because there has been a tendency for, 6 election or 7 election that the turnout would constantly go down, and then last time it went up back again for the first time. Why? Because people got really scared that the far right wants to terminate the European project, and they went out to vote in big numbers, and a lot of young people went to vote as well, and this is why the whole green agenda had a huge boost. It also coincided with the Renew Europe cycle, Macron's push to bring France back into the European mainstream, that also brought in new votes. And so this produced the European Parliament, which actually had more legitimacy in terms of the votes, but also kind of was more centrist than expected. I don't think this is going to happen now for 2 reasons. First, the reason that we all 3 mentioned, namely that the far-right parties have become much less focused on destroying the EU. They're now much more about reshaping the EU according to their own model, to their own kind of way of thinking. But also, I think a lot of the campaigning has been built on people's anxieties. And when you have a defensive agenda, when you don't have, so to say, a grand vision against which you can rally new voters, it's usually, you basically try to make people to vote for the status quo. And, maintaining the status quo is basically the most difficult thing, because usually it tends to go down. So I would say we would be really lucky if we got the turnout from last time, but I don't think we will have that. On the positive note, this is a chance, I think, for Europe to really think about redefining itself. So it will be an election in flux, of a continent in flux. And if it gets a mandate for this defense and security agenda, this is already going to be a way out of this kind of interregnum. And this is why I think having also a very clear agenda for the Commission to work on common European defense, to work on strengthening European competitiveness, to work on getting Europe better equipped for a very, very difficult world out there is going to be crucial.
Okay. Mid-October, you have a unimaginable turnout on the national elections.
I wanted to refer to that, but I also wanted to combine the point on the right wing or the far right even increase. And I wanted to say in the very beginning that as long as we have the war, the dominant narrative and the dominant political message is going to be about security, and security is driven here by statecraft. We need politicians to talk about it. Now, naturally, it will create a backlash at some point because societies don't want to talk about external security that much. And the backlash will come either because we will lose the war, and this is a European war we can lose. And you can imagine a situation that the flower power of Europe will take over, like after Vietnam in the US, creating a ripple effect and the political elite, the political culture of Europe in a sort of unpredictable way as well. But it can generate new impulses and political culture. And it can be also a certain victory of in the war that will also produce a necessity of decompression of later of this security discussion. So in a perspective, of course, this is not indefinite, the rise of the far right, but to prepare for that and to do something with that, that is really the question, because as I mentioned and as I referred to the elections in Poland, and the turnout in Poland was higher, and it gave a premium to the forces that made the change possible. These were primarily younger voters, and these were female voters with an agenda, with a more progressive agenda, or at least women's rights agenda. Now, you don't have that currently in the security language, in the discourse on security, which builds up the right wing of more conservative outlook of the world. And I think this is underinvested, but we should be mindful also that in the demographic decline, of course, the resource to mobilize this kind of voter is increasingly more and more costly. Simply, you need to invest much more and more to mobilize this part of the electorate, which is smaller and smaller.
Thank you. Well, one of the co-authors of the ECFR poll that Ms. Cherneva quoted at the beginning, Mr. Simon Hicks, we took an interview, and we're going to publish it in Dnevnik in the next couple of days. We asked him specifically about the turnout, and his message was something like, watch out what you're wishing for, because there are different countries, different voters across Europe, and in some places you want them to go up, in some places you prefer they to stay home. So it's always dangerous to generalize about the turnout in the European elections.
In the Bulgarian case, it's very clear. So let's have people go out, please.
Yes, please go. Another question from the audience? Yes, please.
Yeah, Jordan Bujilo, Sofia Security Forum. How do you assess the role of Russia in these elections? The Parliament and European Commission already warned about possible Russian meddling in the election. Do you think it's a factor? By the way, I watched today some of Bulgarian candidates. I mean, we don't need Russians to spread pro-Russian propaganda in Bulgaria, believe me. But do you think it is a factor? Do we do enough to prevent Russia influencing the results?
I can start as Poland, yes, exactly. As Poland has this label of knowing everything about Russia. Ursula von der Leyen, which is not true. Ursula von der Leyen had even this pitch for the Polish public. Oh, you know everything about Russia and history. You have the history and foresight on Russia. We should have listened. We should have listened. That's the usual mantra. Poles love that. Whenever you want to appeal to our vanity. Every election is an opportunity because it's a moment of weakness for the institutions, and it's clearly so in these elections as well, that we may have a certain, as an effect, more agents or people aligned with Russia perspective in the next parliament and in institutions as well. The last elections we had open up a whole sweep, and we're still sweeping, how our institutions were penetrated, including public companies in Poland, by people specifically linked to GRU and FSB. So-called Collegium Humanum, Google it, has been set up a bypass way to obtain the special MBA on a fast track for those who would then sit on public companies of strategic importance. And there were many who were simply, because of that, basically placed through by the previous government in these companies. Now, the recent investigations have demonstrated Collegium Humanum has been directly linked to the Russian institutions, and people who were employed there in the public companies, but also in many government institutions, had influence, but also they were taking intelligence about our strategic assets. What I want to say is that it's not about messages and the narrative so much. It's about the effect of the elections that we need to look at. The narrative, I think you're right. There are all different kinds of narratives, but we're past the narrative battle. Narratives were spread for the past 20 years or so. Now we are in the times of a real war, where the narrative served to weaken our position in this war that is happening. That's why we're not having ammo production already. We don't have defense union as we should have had already, because they've been weakening us for the past 20 years or so. Now, are they dangerous today for us? I don't think that much. I think it's much more what we are, if we are dangerous to ourselves because we were poisoned by this Russian virus from before. Are we, capable of pulling our strength for the vaccine? But I don't think Russian meddling is today the problem number one. It's the effects of it that were installed in our societies already.
Anyone?
Not only does Poland know everything about Russia, but Poland was also the last foreign power to successfully occupy the Kremlin in the 17th century. Mistake to leave?
No, a mistake to even try.
But the one thing the Russians are very good at is subversion and infiltration. There were a number of leaders of Western countries that have had significant relationships with Russia over the last 20 years. And I mean Gerhard Schröder, obviously, Silvio Berlusconi, François Fillon nearly became president of France. And we can also always talk about Donald Trump in the United States. And there are lots of lesser figures as well that were also involved in this sort of co-optation by money. Because what Russia's managed to exploit is the openness of our financial system to channel resources into a patronage network that converts Russian natural resources into political influence in Europe. The weakness Russia has, however, is they then do stupid things like invading Ukraine. So they can exercise a lot of this influence, but then they do something openly that makes that influence extremely clear. Whether it's Bidzina Ivanishvili trying to destroy Georgian civil society, whether it's the guys who shot down the Dutch airliner, totally converting Dutch policy. Before that, the Netherlands had been one of the countries most sympathetic to Russia because of large-scale oil interests with Shell. And then you shoot down a plane full of Dutch people, and guess what? It changes. So Russian infiltration is there. It's a serious problem. We need to continue to expose it. We need to develop more instruments to protect ourselves against strategic corruption. And I would like to say that this shows that democratic decline is not just a problem for the citizens of the countries where authoritarian populists come in. It's also a strategic problem because it opens up EU member states to influence by Chinese and Russian authoritarian leaders. So we need to clean up our house there. We need to reinforce that. And then we need to start taking the actions that make us understand that there are strategic threats in this world. We're not in 1993. Strategic competition is real, and we need to put our resources into that strategic competition.
Thank you very much. This reminds me of Monsieur Macron's speech, great speech in a couple of weeks ago. Mark Leonard published his comment on Project Syndicate. He said, great speech, now please deliver. So many things, and the things you mentioned, are known for many years in Europe. Now please deliver, do something about it. Do we have time for one more round, or should we keep? I think because we started a little bit later. Yes, I was going to suggest just the final words for this conversation.
I was thinking about Jordan's question about Russia in the last round, and the more I think about what happened in Slovakia in the last couple of days, the more worried I am, because whether it's Russia itself, it's the Russian proxies, or it's the imagination of Russia, or it's the idea that just everything is out for grabs, whether it's our social media or the weakness of our institutions, whether it's the strategic corruption and our dependencies, all of those things separately we could tackle, but having them all put together, it produces a kind of extreme sense of vulnerability. And I think the Slovakia example is exactly that alarm bell that sounds. We are on the verge of basically losing the sight of what comes next, and I think this is a great test in a way for our democracies, whether we can cope with that. So when we say it's Russia, it's not only Russia, and we have to be aware that a lot of that really actually depends on us and on our matureness as societies to deal with all these different kind of risk factors together.
Yeah, I'll circulating to how much we had Ursula von der Leyen and still Donald Tusk in last week. But one thing in the framing of the discussion that was happening in Poland struck my ears, because we've been discussing, and actually this project on scenario has been very much attached to it, is the question, it's a moral question that we haven't even touched so much. I think it's in the background of our heads, but I think it needs to be much more in the open. What is evil, what is good in these elections and in European democracies, and democracy in bigger parentheses. This moral question is really important, and asking it's really important because it in a way helps us to escape these dilemmas of dependency and bring back agency. We have been building our foundations of the European project, and it can continue only if we ask the right questions. They need to involve the questions of our values, and in that sense, openness and all the values that we have committed ourselves, because of which Europe exists. Russia does not want to do this in their strategic communication. Actually, it invites us to discuss everything else but the values, or ridicule these values in many ways. I think we need to devote much more time. If I have a reflection point on our debate, we need to discuss this even more, because otherwise we are getting into a bit of a trap. And I think we are with this discussion, we're also in a good direction.
Good one.
The big slogan of Unhacked Democracy is defend democracy and it will defend you. And what it is really, it's a plea to agency. Democracy depends on us, and it will survive if we want it to survive. And if enough of us decide to take the steps to get involved, and defend democratic values and democratic politics. And that starts with moving beyond analyzing things that might happen and taking up the agency we all have in a democratic society to be Democrats and to be political activists and to go out and do things. If necessary, it might maybe stand for election, knock on doors, mobilize people, talk to individual voters, even people you would have never thought you would need to speak to ever. Go out of these cities, get out into the countryside and into the villages, find people you disagree with or half agree with, and talk to them. And that's part of this process. And when you're talking to them, remember that we're all emotional creatures. It's great to be able to say, you know, here's a bunch of facts. That doesn't convince anyone. But and while we have negative emotions, and we have fear, and we have the sense that if we're very scared, we want someone else to go and take that fear away, and that's what authoritarians rely on. We also have positive emotions about belonging, about cooperation, and build these into what we're saying. Because together, as citizens of European countries, and indeed citizens of countries beyond Europe, we can show that there is a better way to live than the gospel of fear that the authoritarians want to sell us. We can show that democracy is good, that progress is possible, and that it's not just about hope in an empty kind of way of saying, well, let's hope something turns up. It's hope in the sense of let's actually go out and build that better world. Let's remember that progress matters and that it depends on all of us to actually implement it, to bring it about. It's not some other people out there, the politicians, who will bring about progress. It's us. It's all of us in this room. It's all of us listening on the live stream who will make these changes and who will secure democracy for Europe in the next 20 or 30 years.
Thank you, Garvan, and thank you, Vesela, that you mentioned the Slovakia case. As a journalist, I'm still waiting almost a week later to hear the surgeon who operated the prime minister, and I'm always listening to the Minister of Defense. So thank you for having this bunch of democracy surgeons. Talk to the people who understand and know the field. Don't talk to the Minister of Defense. If you want to talk for democracy, for the elections, choose your partner and your questions, address of your questions. Thank you very much for being with us, and thank you to the audience. Thank you very much.
Welcome once again, and hello to those who are just joining us right now. The second part will contain a political debate among three MEPs: Gerb Citizen Andrei Kovachev, Christian Vigenin, BSP for Bulgaria, and Nicola Minchev from We Continue the Change, Democratic Bulgaria. As co-organizers, we sent invitations to the pro-European political parties who, according to the latest polls, have the chance to send representatives to the European Parliament. We didn't receive an answer from the Movement for Rights and Freedom, and there is no representative. My name is Maria Semyonova from ECFR, and this is Ivan Ruskanov, who is the co-moderator of this event, creator of the platform Zemlevesh. Hello and thank you. The debate will have 4 parts. During the first part, the participants will be able to present broadly their candidates and visions for the EU. Then we're going to turn to the second part, in which we're going to talk about European topics on the European level, how they're important for the entire EU. And in the third part, we're going to delve into details, and we're going to show what part they play into the Bulgarian life, economy, and society. At the end, we have reserved 30 minutes for questions from the audience. We have gathered some questions online from my audience. They're very interesting. We're going to include some of them. Let's move on to the first part. Everybody will start with a short introduction of 2 minutes with their own priorities. Let's start in alphabetical order. Mr. Vigenin, what is your motivation? What are the priorities you're going to fight for in the European Parliament? Following the Bulgarian alphabet order. Thank you for the invitation. I believe this will be an interesting discussion. We only rarely manage to focus on the European topics. A few words from us. This time, in this campaign, we decided to be more structured and to present the main principles for the participation of our representatives, future representatives in the European Parliament, and the decisions they will have to take, and then the main topics of our political family, the Party of the European Socialists, and some national topics. As regards the principles, let me share a few of them. First, when I say principles, this means proposals which counteract these principles should not be supported by our representatives. Firstly, that member states should be equal. In other words, we cannot have different treatment of different member states or the businesses in the different member states, or you cannot have different treatment of the different sectors. Every decision should be based following this principle of equality. Secondly, I believe that the Bulgarian interest should be high on the agenda of our representatives. And some may say, yes, but you cannot move forward this and you cannot have a European interest which is outside the interest of our member states. If this is so, you cannot say that this is the interest of our member states. We believe that good reasons should be in the foundation of every policy. Later, we're going to mention the topic about the Green Deal, but this is one of the most characteristic examples about this. When there are decisions which lead to the economy suffering or the people suffering, you cannot have decisions which cannot be explained adequately. This means that they're not based, they're not grounded on reason. So reason should be the foundation of everything we're doing in the European level. And there is another important topic. We insist on simplifying the regulations on the European level because there are too many, too complex, and we need to have more freedom of the national institutions at the local level. So, and I'm going to finish by saying that the priority in the work of our representatives should be social issues, social policy, and every decision which counteracts this or could lead to new divisions between the member states or inside the member states or to social divisions should be repealed. There are also other important things, but I have run out of time, so I'm going to comment on these later. We started breaking the rules, but we're going to apply the same principle to the others. All representatives will have equal minutes in order to present their motivation and priorities. Mr. Kovachev, you have 3 mandates behind you in the European Parliament. How are these elections different from the previous ones? Let me start by the motto of our campaign, Stable Bulgaria and Secure Europe. Security is in the foundation, and many of the European citizens believe that the European Union should spare more effort on this, both physical security and social industrialization of our continent, and not deindustrialization. I liked hearing that they're going to ask for revision of the Green Deal, but how will they convince the S&D, which was the motor of the Green Deal? Reducing the regulations, especially in agriculture. Our farmers cannot spend 2.5 days per week to write reports. This is a burden which cannot be shouldered. There are other topics, protection of consumers, healthcare, that we need to continue working on, and mostly the geopolitical role of the European Union. And I believe that we'll have time to talk in detail whether we need to have an efficient European Union, which is considered as a strong party or a toothless party. And as regards the expansion, we also have important national tasks on the path of the European integration, plus Moldova, Georgia, plus Northern. Another important topic is reducing migration from the Northern African countries and the new migration pact. We're going to look for increasing the funds for strengthening the external borders, Frontex amounts, whether somebody should remain in the EU, not only receiving the data of criminals, but if there are criminal migrants, they should automatically lose their right to remain in the EU and they should be returned to their countries of origin. Mr. Minchev, this is your first fight for the European Parliament, but you have experience in the National Assembly. This was a turbulent period. How do you imagine the future work in the European Parliament? Thank you for the invitation. Indeed, and it continues to be a turbulent time in the Bulgarian Parliament. To be honest, in the European Parliament, the significant difference is that the mandate does not depend on the opportunity to form government, but the European Parliament is much more decent than the Bulgarian National Assembly, unfortunately. As regards the way we continue the change, democratic Bulgaria is entering these elections. Firstly, for the party I'm a member of, this is the first European elections, but we all approach these elections with the clear idea that this time these elections are different. It became clear during the previous panel that all elections are different, but 2 years after the Ukraine war, the EU is facing unseen challenges. One of the major topics of the future mandate of the European Parliament will be security, both along the borders and regarding the defense capacity in the EU, because we see what the attitudes in the USA are, the opportunity for Trump to return. This means that the EU will be in a situation at which we will take our security into our own hands, and what has been happening for the past decades, to rely on NATO and the US for protecting Europe. This is something which will need to change. But the EU is a political and economic union, so with economic integration that is unprecedented in the history. And the economic topics are very important. European incomes in European Bulgaria are among the main highlights in our campaign. So it will continue when we start working in the European Parliament in the summer. The approach towards migration is important. And also, since Mr. Vigenin and Mr. Kovacev mentioned the Green Deal, of course, we have focused on strong economy and clean nature, but there needs to be a balance between the two, not to go into the extremes. So we're all for clean nature, and probably nobody will think otherwise, but this should not be at the expense of the economy. Thank you.
Thank you all. And now we move on to the second part of this first 20-minute part of the panel. Ivan and I will ask you more concrete questions. Mr. Kovacev, what is your assessment of the work of the outgoing European Parliament? What are the biggest achievements? In your opinion, which policies generated the hottest debates? What has not been achieved and was left for the next European Parliament to tackle? And what is your agenda? Well, as for the whole of the world, the challenges were COVID, how we could respond in the most adequate way, but nobody was aware of what adequate meant at the beginning of the pandemic. Then the two wars, one in Ukraine and then in the Middle East, unfortunately. So this was about these were the biggest global challenges. And the other thing at the beginning of our term, 5 years ago, with the ambitious commitment to the Green Deal. This was the main issue for the main topic of Ursula von der Leyen's Commission and Franz Timmermans. The Commission was had a very green start, so to say, but now it took a turn towards industry, a more real policy vis-a-vis the desire to increase the European Union's competitiveness compared to China and other powers. So what will the next parliament need to do? Well, first, maintain security in Europe and the two aspects of security, defense and the consolidation of the European defense industry. There's a lot to do, and until now, unfortunately, the European Defense Agency has failed. There were over 100 link and sharing projects that were not implemented, and also the strengthening of the French, German, and so on, and other defense industries. If we adopted a lot of resolutions, but they were more like wishful thinking, and they galvanized political circles in many countries, and they didn't like us, and they announced as persona non grata some members of the European Parliament. But there are many, many other topics in this relation. And before you have shown interest towards the federalization of Europe, and now things are developing in a different direction. Is there a future with such ideas? Well, it depends what you mean by this. Even now, European Union is a form of federalization compared to the US. 1% of the we've got 1% of the GDP as a European budget. In the US, they have 20% of the GDPs of all the states. There's the federal budget. So we are 19 times less federalized than the US. The question is not in in saying we have to fight extreme nationalists that say that the European Federation is the worst thing, but it's more that we have to ask the question whether to be together is better than leaving everyone to save themselves on their own. And this means that to me, that means that we should not have this debate whether we like the word or we don't like the word. We know this narrative about the Europe of the nations. Mr. Minchev, your party is more recent, and these are the first European elections that you are participating in. So what strategy are you using in this campaign? Are you trying to discover the topics that are of importance to the public, or you would rather explain to the public what topics are important for you? In this campaign and in the previous campaigns as well, and this will be the fourth campaign for us in the past 3 years, the main focus is on meeting people, traveling around and meeting people. And this includes both aspects, that is providing our perspective to the voters. And of course, this does not preclude the opportunity for voters to ask us questions. So both aspects are included in the campaign. People have a lot of questions, and this is normal because the past year has been very dynamic, but we want to be close to the people. This is what we're doing through the campaign. Mr. Vigenin, I have two related questions to you. On the one hand, even in the previous discussion, we heard about the rising right in Europe. Is this worrying for you? Is this developing worrying for you, being part of the left forces? And how is your Bulgarian Socialist Party different from the European Socialists? On the first question, well, let me say that I remember the previous campaign, the campaign before that. There were suspicions about the power of the far right, that it also that it would threaten the European project. It did not happen in 2014 or in the other elections. I remember in 2007, 2009, this is when the far right groups were created. Well, those groups dissolved because it's very difficult for nationalists to create a common European policy or agenda. But I think those fears are exaggerated. I don't expect any wave. A few months ago, maybe it looked like that, but I think this is subsiding now. And secondly, I think that our political family will maintain its relative share in the parliament and will be again the second largest group. We wished that it was the first, the largest one, but it's not going to be that way. So, and it's important to be the second largest because thus we have the foundation through which we can protect Bulgarian interests as well. With regard to differences, well, they're very well known, but I work very actively on this topic, and I know very well those differences. And I could say that in the past year, they have they have not been so intense. Well, our Western European partners dominate in the Party of European Socialists, but we can see that gradually their attitude to migration changed because they understood that uncontrolled migration threatens the working families in Europe, and the second topic, the second difference, topics of difference. This is the topic of the war in Ukraine. We've said many times that for us, providing a military support for Ukraine is not the way to overcome the conflict, while the majority in the PES want to vote for continuing this support. But even on this topic, we managed to offer a text that was adopted, and this is that our ultimate goal is to restore justice. So these are the main differences with regard to social issues, economy, agriculture, and a number of other topics. We are on the same page, and even on the Green Deal, we have noted, we have written down that it should be first and foremost social, and only after that environmental. Yes, we've got one more minute. Thank you. I just wanted to intervene on the first part of this question for Mr. Vigenin about the future majority in the European Parliament. Indeed, 5 years ago, we expected a rise of the far right, but what happened was higher turnout that neutralized this expectation. But even if there is a rise of the far right, I think, and I'm confident, that the core majority of the European Parliament will be this super large coalition, and we have representatives here. And this will be the driving force again in the European Parliament. Also, when we talking about the far right, let's not include in this group the European conservatives and reformists, but let's include even groups that are even farther right. It's much more difficult for them to unite together because it's very difficult to be together against something rather than being together to support something. Okay, this was the end of the first part with more general questions, and now we will enter the European context. Well, first of all, the first topic is the Green Deal. As Mr. Kovachev said, the Ursula von der Leyen announced the creation of the European Green Deal. There's numerous legislative initiatives, financial instruments. One term of office has passed since the initiation of this Green Deal. And my question to you is, how can you assess what has happened over the past 5 years, having in mind the fact that it has internal and external dimension, with this climate neutrality by 2050, the potential to involve other countries, to have more courageous climate policies. Internally, the Green Deal provides a number of financial instruments for countries to make the green transition smoother and adapt their economies to the future. How do you assess the European Green Deal, its instruments, vis-a-vis this ambitious climate goal to make Europe the first climate neutral continent? 4 minutes. You can intervene. So far, we've been following the rules of the discussion. Okay. Over-ambitious, I would say. I think, and this was actually introduced not so much by Ursula von der Leyen, but more by Franz Timmermans, who introduced this package of over-ambitious legislative acts that have not been implemented yet. And we don't know whether all of them will be implemented, because the next parliament, and it's very likely that there will be majorities to review some of those policies regarding internal combustion engines and other ambitious topics. Ursula von der Leyen herself said clearly that no family, no European citizen should have damage for themselves or their jobs. They should not suffer because of the Green Deal. So the mechanisms, the funds for alternatives, they should be effective and should work and should be well communicated so that as Mr. Minchev said, we can go, we can strike this balance. On the other hand, on the one hand, we should not shoot ourselves in the legs and give everything away to the Chinese. On the other hand, we should take care of the air, of the decarbonization of the industry, but without deindustrializing the European continent. Because we will send away the well-qualified European human resources and we will send away investment. So we need nearshoring, that is bringing industry closer to the European borders, especially on strategic issues like rare metals, raw materials that are important, semiconductors. There's many topics that we should be working on, and there for sure will be a review.
Mr. Kovachev said a lot of things, so I'll be brief. He said that Ursula von der Leyen was not to blame, but Timmermans was the problem for the Green Deal, but the majority in the Commission and in the Council and in the Parliament is of the right-wing parties, and without their support, this wouldn't have happened. So let's admit that everybody is to blame for what happened, and let's try from day one of the next Parliament to start revising the Green Deal, because our thesis is clear. It's nice to be climate neutral, to preserve nature, but if we have an idea that we need to preserve our grandchildren, we shouldn't kill the future of our children now, because SMEs find it hard with the impossible requirements for reporting. We're losing jobs. And this reflects on Bulgaria unfavorably. One of the topics that we want to receive the support of the other formations as well is the following. We need to see the announcement of coal regions in Europe, not only Bulgaria, for economic zones with zero taxes for a certain period of time, which would help the transition towards new economic activities. This is one of the activities of the Bulgarian Socialist Party, which we have come up with 2 years ago. This is a part of the national platform now, and we hope to find supporters for this. There needs to be justice in this, because one cannot impose the same percentages of reduction of CO2 emissions by member states without considering what member states have achieved so far. Bulgaria has reduced its CO2 emissions by 43% since 1990. Now, you cannot ask for 30 or 40% more. You should take into account our contribution so far. So there are numerous topics, as Mr. Kovachev said, but it's important that we have realized that we need to start working fast in the first months of the new parliament. In the beginning of the mandate of the council, there wasn't a majority. Now the EPP has a majority. If we had a majority, Weber would have been president of the commission. Weber was our candidate. So the key word is revising. Mr. Minchev, the context now is different from the one 5 years ago. 5 years ago, at the start of the current outgoing parliament now, at the start of the von der Leyen Commission, the world looked different, Europe looked differently, and the Green Deal was a very ambitious project. But during these 5 years, the agenda changed, and we had the COVID-19 pandemic and then the war in Ukraine. So this changed the context the moment the whole Green Deal project started. But it's very important for us, for Bulgarians, to adopt some things in the Green Deal. Maybe if certain elements are amended, we should treat the Green Deal as an opportunity, not as a threat. So when we talk about the Maritsa East coal mining area in Bulgaria, we should know that it's much more valuable for us to be able to exercise a smooth transition rather than the market overnight to carry out this transition for us. Thank you. We are moving roughly in accordance with the agenda. Next time we should have a bell to stop you if you run over your time. I have some questions, but I will leave them for the Q&A session. Now, migration. The Pact for Migration and Asylum was adopted by the European Parliament in April, quite recently. It changes the EU's migration policy. It changes the Dublin regulation, which saw extreme criticism, especially as regards Schengen. Solidarity, strengthening borders, strengthening international cooperation. These are the main elements of the Migration Pact. I'll be interested to hear your debate. This pact was adopted by a majority by Renew Europe, EPP, and SD. Mr. Vigenin, does the pact consider the challenges? Let me say that the pact, as it was adopted, if it had to be adopted 10-15 years ago, it can't have provided a clear enough perspective of the EU. Now we think that it's an attempt to overcome existing problems. We are pessimists as regards this because we think there are two key issues or three key issues which the EU needs to resolve, but not only through declarations, but in practice. Strict border control, and this should be the priority topic. Secondly, we need to accelerate the procedures for return of migrants who do not receive residence status and have no grounds for such a status, because otherwise we would be in the same situation as 7 years ago, and we would certainly have an influx of immigrants, and the EU couldn't manage. And thirdly, partnerships with the countries which are sources of this migration. We think that the EU should have helped a lot in terms of investment and economic development, stimulating people not to leave their home countries. Nothing, however, happened in reality, so control should start from the very countries which are the sources of migration. And the Bulgarian Socialist Party is much more categorical in its position than our European partners, but there are parties like the Dutch Social Democrats, and we are of the same opinion with them. So the BSP is not an something out of the ordinary, but we should insist on the EU implementing strictly its commitments. I would say that the Migration Pact, which was adopted 10 days ago, is a good step for Bulgaria, because this mechanism for solidarity, which is envisaged there, is of benefit for countries like us, which are at the borders of the EU. This redistribution of migrants inside the EU, or when this is not done, to have an additional payment on the part of countries which deny. These are results which are for the benefit of countries like Bulgaria. Of course, border control is important. but this is a positive effect. So this concern that Mr. Vigenin raised addresses this pact. So this is a positive project for Bulgaria. It's better than the Dublin Agreement, but it's not enough. That's why we supported it. In our manifesto, we want a triple increase of Frontex fees. I hope that the socialists will be convinced that European funds need to be used for installations and maintenance and building at the external borders, because this was a stop, and the Greens and socialists didn't want to see European funds used for ideological reasons for building fences, so to say. Building installations, facilities, maintenance, triple increase of the Frontex fees, common rules for recognizing refugees, moving the checkpoints outside the EU. We had numerous agreements with Turkey, Mauritania, and criminal migrants. Under the new migration pact, we're going to gather this data, but it's not enough just to collect these in Eurodac. There need to be consequences, and the consequences are that the person who has come looked for political asylum in the EU, we have provided the asylum, and he deals in drugs, he has no right to remain, and he has to be returned. It's too easy to say, too hard to implement. We don't know where they come from because they are not showing their passports. But we need to be stricter and not to motivate people traffickers. Speaking of migrant crisis, I believe it's obligatory to mention one of the crises in Ukraine. Several million Ukrainians in the past years left their country and are living in different countries in Europe, including in Bulgaria. And this is a conflict which is close to Bulgaria and has direct reflection on the life of Europeans. My first question to Mr. Minchev. How do you see the European policy on Ukraine, and if Europe is helping materially to Ukraine, how would you see such a help and assistance to Ukraine in the future? Europe should continue to assist Ukraine as efficiently as possible, because the outcome of the war in Ukraine is important for the EU and for the whole continent. After all, the Russian aggression will stop at the point that Europe allows us to, because 10 years ago we saw the annexation of Crimea, and it was not fully addressed by the Western policy, and that it was followed by other action. So we believe that European support for Ukraine is a considerably significant element for the security of the whole continent. Furthermore, the role of Europe will be much more independent in this, because we don't know what will happen after the November elections in the USA. Whether they will continue supporting Ukraine, and this may mean that Europe may have to carry a much more independent and leading role in the support for Ukraine. Even the latest assistance for Ukraine, which was passed through Congress, did not pass seamlessly. But how should this support look like concretely? Creating funds for Ukraine, there are arguments whether the assistance should include arms, military equipment. For sure, it should include arms and military materials. This is the support Ukraine needs the most now. I remember my meeting with the foreign minister, Mr. Kuleba, 2 years ago, when he personally told me that they didn't need so much the life vests that we were sending them. They needed arms, and I understood them. So I believe that the continuing military assistance to Ukraine is very important. You know, we have considerable differences on this point because from the very beginning of the conflict, we said there cannot be a military solution to what is happening, that there should be a global solution, and sitting on the table negotiating 2 years after the conflict, you can see that despite the military assistance to Ukraine, things are not moving in favor of Ukraine. It's all too easy for us to sit and say that the Ukrainians should fight until the last Ukrainian, but we're coming to a dead end. So let's return to the topic of the common sense and mark two things. Neither Russia will win, neither Ukraine, because no matter what assistance we send, no matter what weapons we send, what matters the most is manpower, and Russia has more men. If somebody thinks that there could be military units sent to Ukraine, we should forget this, because there are such ideas. We're categorical that we cannot have such engagement of the EU in this conflict. And the third element, no matter what happens, Russia will be our neighbor. And we should think about the scenarios at which we are structuring some ideas with the participation of Russia. We should rethink our official policy. And we have a different opinion, but it's not anti-European. And if there is another president of the US, it's not something bad. European funds, you saw that there were 50 billion planned recently for Ukraine. And we prefer to have money for humanitarian, economic, social support for Ukraine, for its recovery, rather than for stoking a conflict which has no perspective of being resolved by military terms.
You're shaking your head, Mr. Kovachev. Okay, the Socialist Party, Visegrad Party, they're saying the same things. We are fighting for peace, but all the others love war. But here we have a clear aggressor, and I hope that everybody knows who this is. This is the Russian Federation. There are no arguments saying, oh, they've banned Russian language, they're responsible for the Maidan. No, Russian Federation committed brutal crimes against humanity in Bucha. If you've seen the film about Mariupol, you cannot remain indifferent to what happened to the army. They turned the Russian Navy into a laughingstock, but without Western support, they pushed back the offensive against Kiev. We cannot say that Ukraine is helpless. They are supported by the whole world against this unprecedented attack of Kremlin. We're not talking about Dostoevsky, Pushkin, Tchaikovsky. That's why we should not be talking about Russophiles and Russophobes. We support also the democratic opposition of Russia, Navalny, Kasparov, Nemtsov, others. And I hope that we all as Democrats will support those people. And that's why I hired a Russian citizen in my office from the democratic opposition. We support the democratic opposition in Brussels. So this should be our mission, peace, but just peace. And it's good that Mr. Vigenin said they wrote down justice in the document, but what does it mean? You know, the dreams of the Russian Federation, they want to reach Transnistria. Is this just peace? Well, all this is very good, but it's not based on realities. But it's so it's a jungle where there's no international law. But these are things that maybe 18 months ago they had some point, but nobody wants to use those realities now. And what the European Union is doing now, and many of the member states, even Bulgaria joined in, and all socialists, except from you. Except for you. We have to use the realities and seek for solutions instead of analyzing what has happened. But why would you want to give something? Who are you to want to do it? Okay, let's maintain civilized tone. Okay, we said from the first day of the war, we said who the aggressor was, but we want realities to be part of the thinking of the decision making. So jungle is reality. It's not because Russia is stronger. Let's make this finish quicker so we have fewer victims. Well, we have pointed out who the aggressor is. So those words are part of a declaration. I remember that it took a lot of time to draft it. So those words should be underpinned by action. So we have to say who the aggressor is and who has the right to defend themselves. And we cannot say, well, the reality is that Russia is stronger. What does it mean? We have to give it an open space to the border of Ukraine with Poland, so this finishes quicker. No, there's no solution of this conflict, and more people will die. Dozens of thousands of people will die. But okay, this bears upon the issue of just peace. So we can discuss this in the last part of the debate. But now let's switch to national topics. So we've been having a hot discussion of European topics, and now what about Bulgaria? When we mentioned the Green Deal, one of the big elements is energy. We mentioned already that perhaps the Green Deal will be reframed, but for the time being, it requires a big transformation of Bulgarian economy and energy for the generation of electricity. Bulgaria is now dependent on coal-fired power stations and the nuclear power plant of Kozloduy. Not Belene. This was a mistake. But the question is, and I would ask first Mr. Vigenin, related to NPP Kozloduy, what will be the effect on Bulgaria? Recently, we've been hearing promises to the citizens, while on the EU level, other commitments are being undertaken. Perhaps, how do you see the future of Bulgarian economy after this energy transition? We think, and in general, the whole idea with this early closing down of the coal-fired power stations, this was wrong, because when you're rushing to do something, you often make mistakes. It's no good to undertake action without thinking about the consequences. With regard to Bulgarian energy, we are worried by the large-scale installment of photovoltaics. And we even thought about the idea to pass a law to protect the fertile Bulgarian land, because there are photovoltaics being installed on fertile land, and this land is then destroyed. Those photovoltaics, they work when there is sun, and then the other power plants, they are effective when there is energy generated by photovoltaics. So we have to support Bulgarian energy. We support new nuclear facilities being built. We know that now the Russian reactors that arrived in Bulgaria for Belene power plant, they will be sent to Ukraine, and those that the U.S. reactors that will be built in Kozloduy, they cost much more, and there were some suspicion about the dubious decisions taken. But what we want to do is the following. First, we have taken the commitment in our platform not to close down coal-fired power stations until we have compensation for that nuclear power plant, nuclear facilities. And also we want to have hydropower stations on the Danube River bank, and also pump storage power plants. We want to keep the Bulgarian economy away from those fluctuations. Okay, we mentioned NPP Belene. What about if it's the most recent European decision says that the nuclear energy can be admissible up to a certain time frame. So isn't Belene NPP against this decision? First of all, this time frame is the aim of this time frame is to calm down the opponents of nuclear energy. I think this time frame will be extended or removed, because without nuclear energy, renewable sources of energy cannot provide sustainability. Well, the EPP did its best. We managed to find majority for announcing nuclear energy as green energy, as renewable energy, and those new reactors that will be legitimately built, they will not be decommissioned until the end of their life cycle. And there's a big question mark here. This project Belene that spans over decades. It's been started many times, stopped many times. So what happened? And then without a final contract signed, without an end price, it turns out that somebody ordered a reactor and a half, as if you were ordering a coffee machine. And here the question is, how did this happen, and why do we have a reactor and a half, which we don't want what to do with it? Initially we were going to give it to Turkey, and now we're going to give it to Ukraine. So it's very unclear what will happen to it. With regard to Kozloduy, I hope we'll have a new generation reactor, secure one, safe one, and also with this diversified fuel that is not dependent on Russia. And now let's move away from the topic of nuclear energy. Now, Belene NPP is not a contested project. It should not be stopped, I would say to Mr. Kovachev. Yes, if we should be using our common sense. Now, think about, let's talk about the coal-fired power plants. Now, the Green Deal as it stands now, they have to be phased out in the foreseeable future. And how do you think this will happen? Will this happen in Bulgaria, considering the situation now? Well, this is the main aspect, political will, because even if there is a change in the time frame, we have to ultimately prepare for this moment where we will use coal-powered fired power plants less and less until we stop using it. But this also means that the political class should be open to people, and indeed, many people have been working in those coal-fired power plants in Maritsa. And we have to make a smooth transition so that people have time to retrain, to find new jobs. And we need this smooth transition because this energy will be uncompetitive, and we should not wait for the market to actually make this stop. But we have to find the political will for this.
Thank you. We don't have a full half hour for Q&A from the audience, but let me start a topic like expansion of the EU. Please be brief, up to 2 minutes. Should the EU expand further in the next 5 years, and if so, which should be the next EU member state? And the second aspect has to do with Bulgaria. We were among the staunchest supporters of the integration of the Western Balkans to the EU, but after the bilateral problem with the Republic of North Macedonia, this has become diluted. What should Bulgaria do in order to win back its prestige as a member state supporting the European integration of the Western Balkans, especially in the current geopolitical situation in which attracting the region towards the European family is very important, especially considering that the Western Balkans are not only North Macedonia. It's hard to talk in less than 2 minutes, but in 2018, during the Bulgarian presidency of the Council of the EU, we wanted to help the Western Balkans to integrate faster, especially the Republic of North Macedonia. We signed the contract in 2017. There was the Sofia Declaration. The leaders came to Sofia. Bulgaria did a lot then and lent a hand to all of the Western Balkan countries, and we hope that by the end of 2030 or even earlier, to see at least 1 or 2 countries which should become full-righted members like Montenegro, Albania. And we hope that our good friends from Vardar will overcome their issues. Please don't say bilateral issue. We don't have a bilateral issue with North Macedonia. We have a European problem, Copenhagen criteria. There is a problem saying that you're Bulgarian in North Macedonia. There is no Bulgarian in the local authority prosecutor's office. It's a dangerous thing to say you're Bulgarian, which means that there is a basic issue, which is not a bilateral problem about Samuel as a king. No, there is an issue related to basic human rights. they should stop destroying your business and hitting your children at school if you say you're Bulgarian. It's not too much to ask for. They should overcome those things which have gathered through the years. Zaev got scared at one point. We hope that there is another brave person who manages to overcome the scare of the Tito times. Mr. Vigenin, we support the expansion of the EU. We have always supported it. We were among the last to accede to the EU, so we should be more open. Nevertheless, there should be no presence, and if there is a country which wishes to become an EU member state, should meet all the criteria. These countries, while preparing, should overcome the bilateral issues with their neighbors. Mr. Kovachev, this is an open-ended question as regards the bilateral issues, and as regards Serbia and North Macedonia, we believe that the observation of the human rights in Serbia and of the Bulgarians in North Macedonia are of ultimate importance. These are key values of the EU, so there should be no compromise there. And we are focused more on North Macedonia, and we seem to leave behind what is happening in Serbia. You should be very careful. These topics have been placed in our bilateral relations. So we have set the European dimension of this. We should keep our eyes on these issues. Bulgaria could and should help the countries progress along their EU membership. Unfortunately, the so-called Euro-Atlantic majority during the past year wasn't so European because the European agenda was marginalized. For example, Denkov, as a Bulgarian PM, didn't come to the parliament, Bulgarian parliament, to inform us about the European Council meetings. The European Issues Committee was chaired by the leader of We Continue the Change, but he had other priorities. So it's one thing to talk and quite another thing to do things in practice. I hope that gradually Bulgaria brings back the topic of the Euro integration and Bulgaria's role in our region, because compared to the time of the Bulgarian presidency of the Council of the EU, now people don't look at us seriously as a factor in the policy in Bulgaria, but we should bring back our image, and we should help if there is an adequate election after these elections. If we had more time, I would have asked you what we can do more to warm up the relations between Sofia and Skopje. They should fulfill their requirements. The expansion of the EU is a normal part of its development. So, however, deepening the integration is another important thing. So these are important things in the development of the European Union. So it's normal to think about expansion, but I cannot say which will be the next country to become an EU member state, because it's up to whether you meet the criteria. This is a leading principle. I agree with Mr. Kovachev that the Bulgarian presidency in 2018 gave an impetus for the European perspective of the Western Balkans, and in this regard, Bulgaria's role should be a leading one, because we are a member state from the Balkan Peninsula, so we could give a good example, and we could show our neighbors, and there are many countries in the EU, so we should show it makes sense to be an EU member state. They should believe the European project, because we can see a certain reduction in the hopes for EU perspective in some countries from the Western Balkans. So we should play a leading role here. The veto on the enlargement process of North Macedonia and Albania was a bad move. It's good that this question found its adequate resolution, and those topics which were important for Bulgaria were included in the negotiation framework. This is a very good solution, but we should have a leading role in convincing and maintaining the hope in the Western Balkans for their European perspective. Thank you. As you mentioned, the European solution was to make this from a bilateral to a European-wide project. Now we move on to the last part of this debate. Ivan, before we move on to the questions from the audience, emerging from the topic of the role of the EU in Bulgaria, there is a blitz last question. It's notorious that turnout is low, especially on EU Parliament elections. Why do you believe this is so, and what are you doing in your campaigns to overcome this issue? Mr. Minchev, I believe that the turnout at the European elections is lower than the customary one, because for many Bulgarians, European institutions are somewhat remote in terms of geography, institutions, and knowledge about what these institutions do, which means that we politicians haven't explained why these institutions are important for us and why they matter for us, why they are not external elements, quite the opposite. They are important, they're part of us because they're part of Europe. Are you doing it now? Are you raising awareness? Yes, we are, but this should not be just occasional. It should be done regularly. It's not by chance that the turnout at local elections is the highest because they are closest to the hearts of individuals. This time we have elections 2 in 1, so we'll have local, national parliament elections in the same day as European Parliament elections. So it's normal to see high turnout for the European elections because the 2 elections coincide. Mr. Vigenin, I see a chance that the 2 elections are on the same date, because on the one hand, this allows us within the same meetings to explain how much the national policy depends on the European one and to what big extent the European policy depends on the national elections. And at almost all of our meetings, I say that the elections for national parliament are also European elections because it depends on who wins the national elections, who the next Bulgarian commissioner will be, which ministers will be in the European Council. So in reality, we have the chance in the same day to resolve 2 issues with 1 bullet. So we will decide which the ministers will be, which the European Commissioner from Bulgaria will be. So this time, I believe that individuals will have a better understanding of how important European elections are and how they affect national policy. I agree with Mr. Minchev and Mr. Vigenin, so I'm not going to reiterate what they said. I'm just going to say what I mentioned to my meetings, at my meetings with young people, that freedom should not be taken for granted. We should be active in order to maintain what we have and build on it to improve our welfare, to have all the types of security we talked about. And let me return to freedom. The fact that you can open your mobile phone, buy a ticket and be in Frankfurt, Madrid or Lisbon was unthinkable for a whole generation of Bulgarians. This is not something to be taken for granted, and you need to be active in order for this freedom to continue to exist. We move on to the questions from the audience now. Let's start with 3 questions online, and then allow our audience to get inspired and raised their hand for a question. Please provide a quick answer. What do you mean by quick answer? 30 seconds. Mr. Vigenin, do you believe we need a European army? And what would it look like? I think it's early to talk about an army, but undoubtedly the EU should have a higher role of its own defense and security. There should be better coordination between the military interests of the member states. We should increase the course that exist and to gradually create the opportunities for us not to be so dependent for our defense and security on a structure like NATO, not because we are against NATO, but because we see that sometimes, depending on the political processes in different NATO members, Europe could be left behind, and we should be ready for this moment. So otherwise, we're for this, but we are against the idea for the European economy to move on military rails. The EU is a union of peace and shouldn't be turned into a union of war. This is a strange phrase. What do we mean by European army as a strong pillar of NATO in Europe? We shouldn't be doubling the structures. We shouldn't double the training of our personnel. The US are talking the same way. They say you should invest more for your defense. Stop relying on us to defend you. This is not for free. Of course, we need to have a strong defense, so we need consolidation of our defense sector. So that's why we need to purchase military equipment jointly. And we also need to have joint training of our military personnel. That's my idea of a European army, or having a common European capacity, because it was ridiculous when North Korea promised 1 million shells to Russia, and they fulfilled their promise. Well, we haven't fulfilled on our promise for Ukraine. We should be more efficient in answering this dangerous world around us. Yes, we want peace, but if there are wars around us, we should be prepared. And are you going to work for a better role in Bulgaria in the European defense industry?
Mr. Minchev, same question. Yes, for sure. Strengthening the defense capacity of the European Union, better coordination between the defense capacity of the member states, better cooperation, and using equipment that can be coordinated, because we have some Soviet equipment that cannot be coordinated with Western equipment. So we support, and also the idea of a Euro Commissioner on Defense. Next question to you, first of all, as a lawyer. Would you support on the EU level the drafting of a regulation on sanctions similar to the Magnitsky sanctions, sanctioning citizens, European citizens for serious crime? Yes, I think we could think about regulations. I've got 30 seconds. Yes. What kind of sanctions? Well, I haven't thought about this question in detail, but otherwise we'll be in a situation when concrete individuals are sanctioned by the US, partner country for the European Union, and by the UK, another partner. On the other hand, this seems not to have a big effect within the European Union, and it may happen that there's some institutional legitimacy on the 9th of May. But yes, we could be thinking along those lines. I'm a skeptic, skeptical a bit, because if we see the functioning of the Magnitsky sanctions now, well, as a person who is under the sanctions, under those sanctions, and at the same time having this person governing, leading the government for 1 year, then I think we don't need special legislation. But if something meaningful is offered, why not? We will analyze it. Well, we have always supported the idea of a European Magnitsky Act because there are individuals who commit genocide for individuals who participate in schemes. We need to have sanctions for those people, and we need legislation. Well, finally, yes or no questions. That's last round. Our readers ask about the qualified majority. What do you think? Do we want this to be lifted? No, especially in terms of enlargement. We said we want to have an effective policy of the European Union adapted to the changing world. It will be difficult to imagine this, especially in terms of the sanction regime. The EPP thinks that there cannot be any other way of voting. Qualified majority on the foreign policy issues, issues related to the sovereignty of member states. This would mean breaking up of the European Union. So our party is definitely against. So we will insist on unanimity. About the enlargement, unanimity. And now questions that we will collect from the audience. I hope that you've summoned courage to ask questions. We'll start at 10 minutes later.
You talked about migration and Fortress Europe. So if I understand correctly, you're all pretty strict on migration and wanted to make harder for migrants to come to Europe. What I kind of missed in that conversation, nobody talked about the shortage of workers that is happening all over Europe, and if I'm correctly informed, also in Bulgaria. Could migration not also be an opportunity for Europe, or do you have a policy proposal how to combat the shortage of workers, if not by migration?
Well, what we meant was irregular migration, not legal migration.
I suggest we gather 3 questions in total, and then they will answer them.
Okay, mine is a kind of follow-up. Elif Menderes from Turkey. As someone from Turkey, of course, my question is related to migration. We are hosting officially 7 million and unofficially 10 million migrants in Turkey, which includes Ukrainians, Russians, Iraqis, Iranians, Afghans, Syrians, so on and so forth. So, of course, the migration is the main, let's say, the dynamic and also local politics, the domestic politics in Turkey. And most of the time when we talk about the humanitarian side of the crisis, the safe return is on the table. But if we are talking about a safe return, we have to talk with the other side, I mean the Syrian regime. In Turkish case, 80% of the migrants are coming from Syria, and to have a kind of suitable solution to this crisis, which has also a humanitarian side, we have to sit with Syria to talk about what we can do for the future. So I'm wondering, what do you think about the European perspective? To what extent Europe is ready to sit with Syrian regime? Because otherwise there is no safe return. Of course, if they are illegal, if they are somehow associated with the crime-related things, they have to turn back. But turning back to where? To Turkey, to Syria? If it is Turkey, it's not a suitable solution for Turkey for sure. But if it is Syria, at the end of the day, we have to sit together to find a suitable solution. So do you think that in the near future, we will see Europe as sitting on the same table with Syria regime? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Simona Nikolova. My question is more national. You, Mr. Minchev, you touched upon the issue that Bulgarians feel Europe is far away. I think this is really an issue. Citizens are not very well aware of the decisions made by the Bulgarian MEPs in the European Union. And what do you think? What are you going to do if you're elected during your term? How do you think you should communicate with the voters, with your voters, so that we don't feel Europe is far away? Because Europe is Bulgaria, Bulgaria is Europe. Thank you. So we'll stop collecting questions. And I hope that those of you who have additional questions will be able to ask them later in private conversation. And now I will sum up the first question. All three of you talk about the issue with migration. You mentioned Fortress Europe. And the conclusion was that you are all against it. And the counter argument was that migration can be helpful for overcoming the labor shortages. Well, very quickly, we meant was the illegal border crossing, but Mr. Minchev can confirm this. In the recent weeks, Parliament voted for a relief for Bulgarian the Bulgarian hospitality sector because of the shortage of labor. And this is legal migration, which is necessary. I know from my German colleagues that Germany lacks 1 million jobs. Actually, it has 1 million jobs that are not covered. So we do need, of course, we need qualified labor, but what we meant was the smugglers, traffickers, and the irregular and illegal migration. Let's first finish the first question. Well, we cannot use illegal means to develop policies on the labor market. Well, perhaps we can have more bilateral agreements between EU member states and third countries, but this is regulated. We don't object against it. But of course, we have to be careful because this should happen where there's really a shortage of labor and not invite people that can be competitors to Bulgarian or EU workers because those third country nationals, they can work at a lower pay. Well, yes, we talked about illegal migration. Yes, there is a shortage, but this is not an argument for tolerating illegal migration. I just want to add, because we didn't have time to ask all the questions from those that we collected, but most of the questions were on illegal migration. So obviously this is an important topic for the Bulgarian society. Should focus on it, but not only within a political panel, but also an expert one, because the situation is very complex and we are yet to see what will happen. Let's move on to the next question, which was also directly related to migration. It was mentioned that many of the migrants from the Middle East, especially from Syria, they go through Turkey, and there are millions of migrants there. And the question was, what would happen to the illegal migrants if they have to be sent back? Would they go back to Syria, where it would not be safe for them, or in Turkey, where it would be, but this is not the country of origin? So is it possible for the EU to sit at one table with Syria? Well, we have to be grateful to Turkey because it strictly fulfilled its commitments to the European Union and helped a lot for regulating this influx that we had a few years ago. With regard to returning migrants, well, it depends where they come from. If they come from Turkey, it's logical to send them back to Turkey. But those migrants that come from conflict areas, they're war refugees, and the European Union has commitments to them. So they should not be part of, they should not be within the scope of the others. And for Turkey, yes, I don't know whether I understood your question correctly. Mr. Kovacev.
We appreciate very much what Turkey is doing. Okay, we appreciate.
Indeed, we are grateful to Turkey for the good cooperation because the Bulgarian and Turkish services GERB has always insisted, and the European Union as well, one has always tried to fulfill their commitments to Turkey. Turkey indeed has this burden of almost 10 million unofficial migrants, and officially there are 7 or 8. So they need education. They need their children to go to school, to the kindergarten, to use the healthcare system of Turkey. So this is a great burden for Turkey. So we have to strengthen our cooperation with Turkey and all its services in order to make our external borders even more secure, and of course to contribute to the good regional cooperation and security. With regard to Syria, this is a very complex issue. Well, Syria, or we should talk to the Republican Guards of Iran, who governs Syria. Assad is supported by Russia and Syria and Iran. Russia and Iran are dominating in Syria. The US decided to be a peacemaker, not intervene in Syria, and left Syria to Iran and Russia. So it's not very likely that they will be very willing to help us. On the contrary, they want to create as many problems as possible for the European Union. They want to divide us. This is the main goal of the Russian services. Mr. Minchev, yes, I will join the appreciation for Turkey for what they have been doing for so many years, because it directly reflects has a direct reflection on the situation in Europe. Yeah, but for Syrians, Syrian citizens fleeing war, well, this is different because they are not economic migrants. They are refugees, and they're treated in a different way that when they are admitted to the European Union, so that we don't get into a situation to have to send back someone, but we don't know where to send him to. Last question, how are you going to communicate with the citizens? I will add another question to it from the platform. How do you intend to involve young people in the political process of the European Union? Can you address both questions?
I'm sorry, I may sound a bit rude, but I've been hearing this from many places. We don't know anything about you. What are you doing? So if anybody's interested, he cannot tell me, we don't know what you're doing. When we're talking about the European Union and the European Parliament, there is a lot of information, and if you're interested, you will know who is voting for what, who is making what statement. Information is there. The question is if people are interested in this. Is the same issue about the Bulgarian National Assembly. They may say the same about 240 members of Parliament of Bulgaria that they haven't heard or they aren't informed about them. But we've had hundreds of assistants and we have this initiative that I propose, like ambassadors of the European Parliament. This is a very interesting idea, and I'm glad that many schools join this idea to have ambassadors of the European Parliament. So I would gladly see many young people getting enthusiastic about the European idea. And I'd like to see less and less people who, fewer and fewer people who are not interested in the European idea. Every day we get a lot of emails and letters. I just got an email from a girl who was a visitor 10 years ago, and I saw her in Gabrovo. She saw me there as well. She's a teacher now, so there is a link. We maintain contact, but young people should be active. It shouldn't be a top-down approach. We telling you what the youth politics should be. The link should be bottom-up. You should tell us what you want to see. Let's follow the order of the national representation until the 9th, then things will be different. What the Bulgarian MEPs should be once they are voted for, once we are voted for after the 9th of June, we shouldn't shy away from the journalists for 4.5 years and just appear in the last 6 months of the term in office. But people should have more interest in this institution that we're going to hopefully work in, because going to Brussels and losing the link with the local context, with the region you were sent from, will lead to disappointment, lack of interest. So this is something we should work on. After all, a part of the work of an MEP is to maintain contact with their own region. So a part of an MEP, and the colleagues have more experience from me, but apart from the work is for the MEPs to also be close to their electorate through a local office, through initiatives on the territory of the country, or through presence in the international domain. In this way, in the national domain, sorry. I have the advantage that I have been in the European Parliament, I have participated in the European Council and in the national parliament, so I have confronted the situation how people don't want to see the link between these. I was a chair of the Committee on European Issues during the Bulgarian presidency of the Council of EU, and I know that the European topic was in the Bulgarian parliament as well. The ministers used to come and report in the commissions when they participated in the council, and the prime minister or vice prime minister participated in the meetings and informed what is happening at the European councils. We used to coordinate positions. I think that the only way for the people to know what is happening and for this European topic to be important, not only during elections, but at other times as well, is for each institution to put the European topic in its agenda, because they participate, they are part of the European agenda. We should not leave this to the individual activity of the MEPs. This won't do. Young people will be engaged when we put the youth topics in the European policy, whether expanding Erasmus the way we want, or having a financial tool for funding education, or the cultural checklist. When these topics are put in the agenda, the young will keep track of what is happening, and I urge them to do. I urge them to follow the news. The generations before us have fought for this. Now we just need to maintain this, or even build on top of this. Thank you all. Do we have any last questions? Just one last question. Luisa? No, we cannot afford another question. I hope you don't mind that we're taking more from your time. I want to pose a question which has to do with the European citizen initiatives. In the past 5 years, we have seen reforms in the legislation on humane treatment of animals, on human welfare, on animal welfare, sorry. This is a battle, and many animals could be saved from suffering. Do you have a position on this? We are currently having a campaign called Vote for Animals. The idea is to stimulate MEPs to start and launch these initiatives. Has this campaign reached you, and do you have a position on animal welfare? I received a lot of emails in this regard. For me, this is an important topic, so I'm ready to support it. But let's not start talking before the 9th of June. After the 9th of June, you should turn to those elected, and if necessary, we can do something more. This is not so much a political topic, but rather an attitude towards animals. And the second, can I pose a second question? It has to do with the use of European public funds. I'm Iva Dimitrova from Zazemyata. It has to do with whether we're efficiently using these resources, and I'll provide you context. The Recovery and Resilience Plan in the green pillar is at 3% implementation. At the same time, there is investment which should target the energy poor, but the procedure is excluding them. And in this way, we see this mistrust in the European institutions and public funds because they don't reach people. And in reality, there is a huge potential in order to pass through the green transition and not to leave anybody behind. So what would you do for a more transparent and efficient use of the European funds? First, of course, animal welfare is our priority. I signed this urge and will stand behind these policies, which are supported by the EPP. However, we shouldn't. We mentioned we are for reduction of bureaucracy and the burden on our beneficiaries. However, the fact that we have such a low level of absorption, we should discuss with Mr. Minchev why this happened in the past 3 years, why we were in a delay with the Resilience and Sustainability Fund, RRP. I don't want to say who is to blame. It's not Brussels to blame, which has excluded these beneficiaries. This is a problem made in Bulgaria, and we should identify who is to blame in Bulgaria. I don't wish to enter into this argument, but I agree that this is a local problem. for the internal politics, how we spend European funds, how transparent is the spending of funds, and we have a problem, local problem with corruption outside the competence of the European Parliament. But we should not say that due to the fact that we're fighting corruption, we're not going to use any funds. No, I said that politically speaking, there was a subcommittee under the European Commission Committee for controlling how EU funds are being spent. And in this parliament, it was transformed into a full-fledged commission. I hope that this commission starts working efficiently in the next parliament. But there is a budget control committee in the European Parliament with different functions. But anyway, it could still monitor this. And how about the Chamber of Auditors? It could monitor this as well. I suggest that we end on something constructive to look for the common elements. I learned you studied in the same school, although in different years. I knew this about Mr. Vigenin. This doesn't have to do with your 9th grade marks. But let's summarize in one sentence. Which is the topic that you have the same opinion with the others? This is a hard sentence because can I help? Yes. Because there is a topic which has been on the table for 15 years, Schengen. There is no argument about Schengen. We have, all three of us, worked on Schengen, and we'll keep working on this topic until we enter the Schengen area. How about the Euro area? Yes, but not now. North Macedonia. North Macedonia. When Mr. Vigenin said, can I help? This was something good. So Schengen, any other common topic? What would you vote for together? For protecting the rights of Bulgarian communities who have been left for historical reasons outside the current boundaries of Bulgaria, not only North Macedonia, but Moldova, Ukraine, Serbia, Kosovo, or on the mobility package, protecting the Bulgarian products like rose oil and other products. You're taking too many options. And there is a large topic which will come within this parliament, which is the next budget of the European Union. So I believe we can find touching points in the cohesion policy. We'll keep working, we'll see. However, there is one disappointment. We're talking about budgets and funds which are for Bulgaria. We can fight for for a lot of money, but Bulgaria could not be absorbing. So let's agree that we'll fight for having more money for Bulgaria in the EP. So on a positive note, we're going to finish our debate. Thank you.